Coming up on Market Shares, the two presidential candidates just faced off in their first ever debate, how they address the #1 concern, the economy.
The PGA Tour officials are meeting with Saudi Arabia's Public Investment Fund. We'll break down if any progress has been made for professional golf.
Plus, markets bouncing back after a rough last week. Hold on to your wallets because Market Shares starts right now.
We're about 15 minutes past the hour here on Market Share. Good afternoon. We're about 15 minutes past the hour here. Welcome into Market Shares. I'm Mike Lamorte.
And I'm Peter Elliott. Thank you so much for joining us here on this Friday the 13th, which hasn't really been a horror movie here on Wall Street. Pretty good week both today and throughout this last week. The major index is up, and we'll tell you all about that, the impact that presidential debate had on it as well. But first, Michael, let's get to our headlines of this week. And one company that has been in those headlines all too often, that is Boeing, where just this morning, more than 30,000 workers walking off the job there, halting production of its airplanes. This comes after staff overwhelmingly rejected a new labor contract. Workers in Seattle and Oregon voting 96% in favor of a strike, well over the 2/3 majority needed.
Yeah, a lot going on with Boeing there. At the heart of this agreement was a 25% wage increase over 4 years, what workers argued was not suitable for the current cost of living. Now, the financial impact of this strike depends on how long it lasts, but even a 1-month strike could cost the company $1.5 billion. Boeing has burned through almost $8 billion this year as production has fallen short of expectations. After a door plug fell out of a Boeing 737 at the start of the year, the troubles for Boeing just continuing.
Yeah, they really are, Michael. Well, on the other side of the aisle, or terminal, American Airlines Flight Airlines just approved a 5-year labor deal. This ends one of the industry's most contentious contract negotiations and will give cabin crews raises of up to 20%. This deal is a relief for some of America's leaders who faced yet another strike from flight attendants if the two sides couldn't get to a deal. Now, the president of the Association of Professional Flight Attendants stated, quote, "This contract marks a significant milestone for our flight attendants, providing immediate wage increases of up to 20.5%, along with significant retroactive pay to address time spent negotiating." That's from Julie Hendrick, of course, president of that association. A big win there, Michael, for flight attendants.
Yes, absolutely there, Peter. To talk more about another topic here, if you booked a flight recently, you may have noticed an increase in prices. Flights are getting more expensive again as airlines scale back their growth plans, a sign that customers will have to shell out more to fly in the coming months. Alaska Airlines just raised its third quarter profit forecast to a little over $2 per share. That's up from its previous $1.60 per share. And Delta Airlines said that domestic and transatlantic revenue is expected to be up this month compared to last year. We saw this ring true in Wednesday's inflation report, which it showed an airfare price index that rose almost 4% in August after 5 months in decline.
Well, speaking of decline, that's what mortgage rates have done for the last 6 weeks, reaching the lowest point, 6.2% in over a year and a half. That's great news for home buyers as well as homeowners who are looking to refinance their mortgages. But while this drop is good news for the housing market, it might be too early to celebrate. The long-term rates might not fall too much, with analysts advising that outside factors like interest rate cuts and the strength of the economy are already priced in. It comes as the Fed is expected to cut interest rates for the first time since it began its crusade to combat inflation back in March of 2022.
And for the first time since COVID-19 began, the U.S. Census Bureau says household incomes are on the rise in the United States. This data shows incomes rose 4% from 2022 to 2023, and analysts are saying it's a reflection of a stronger job market and easing inflation. While this comes as good news, some data in the census reflects an uneven recovery back to pre-pandemic times. Why? Well, the report showed women experienced smaller income gains than men, along with some disparities among racial and regional groups. Now, regardless, many Americans still feel economic pressures due to high interest rates and previous inflation spikes. But the Federal Reserve is expected to discuss the potential lowering of interest rates in the meetings next week.
Well, Microsoft making some big internal changes this week. Yesterday, the tech giant announcing the hiring of former GE CEO Carolina Dybeck-Happ. This comes after Microsoft shifted its focus to artificial intelligence. The company says Dieback Hap will report directly to CEO Satya Nadella. Now, the new hire will join Microsoft's senior leadership team as the Vice President and Operations Officer, a position that has been left vacant since 2016 after former Walmart executive Kevin Turner left the company.
And Microsoft is not the only company making changes in leadership. Brian Nicole, former executive of Chipotle and Taco Bell, just took over as Starbucks CEO. Now, that became their third chief executive in just 3 years. His main focus is improving the U.S. store operations, making cafes more welcoming, and balancing to-go orders with in-store experiences. Now, Nicole's appointment boosted Starbucks shares by 25%, adding $20 billion in value. He promises to invest in technology and store design to enhance customer experiences and expand internationally into dynamic markets like China. Nicole notes that, quote, "In some places, especially in the U.S., we aren't always delivering. It can feel transactional. Menus can feel overwhelming. Product is inconsistent. The wait is just too long or the handoff too hectic. These moments are opportunities for us to do better," end quote.
Well, he's obviously known as a huge kind of takeover artist for his work at Taco Bell, Chipotle. We'll see if he can do the same now at Starbucks. I think a lot of analysts are expecting he can really turn that ship around. Well, sports gambling, also, that's a ship that's really been turned around after major legislation was overturned in 2018 by the Supreme Court. It's taken the world by storm over the last few years. That wave kicking off back in 2018, like we talked about, when the Supreme Court struck down that federal ban on sports betting. It's now legal, Michael, in 38 states. The industry making a record $11 billion in revenue last year, a remarkable 11% increase from the year prior.
Yes, in response to two lawmakers just introduced legislation that would implement federal regulations. Representative Paul Tonko and Senator Richard Blumenthal introduced the Supporting Affordability and Fairness with Every Bet, or the Safe Bet Act. Tonko said in a press conference that, quote, "This relationship between the gambling industry and sports has reached intolerably dangerous levels, and it's well past time for Congress to set up and make a difference. They say they are not trying to ban the practice, but rather make it safe for the public." Here.
Michael, sticking with sports here, forking over some big bucks for the Bucks. Former NBA player Ulysses Bridgman is buying a 10% stake in the Milwaukee Bucks. That's the team he played for from 1975 to 1984. Bridgman, the current owner of Ebony and Jet magazines, is currently reported to have a net worth of more than $600 million. The Bucks are owned by three groups that each share a roughly 25% stake in the team. This purchase, Bridgman's purchase, valuing the team at $4 billion, and that shows the value of NBA franchises even after the NBA's new media rights deal, and especially after Mark Cuban made waves when he sold his majority share in the Dallas Mavericks last year.
Now, Peter, let's move over to Trump Media. Their shares just shot up by more than 25% after the former president said he is not selling his stake. Now, earlier this week, the company fell to a new low. The stock fell almost 4% yesterday and closed at around $16 per share. Its lowest close since the company's debut on the NASDAQ back in March. Shares of Trump Media were down about 60% since their last surge back in July and 14% since the presidential debate last Tuesday.
Well, Michael, let's talk about that presidential debate. Obviously, we saw millions of Americans watching that debate, many more than the one back in June between current President Joe Biden and Donald Trump. We know a lot has changed since then, but they met on Tuesday for the first time ever in Philadelphia, and a lot of news was made. Currently, it's their only debate scheduled between the two.
Yes, absolutely. Now, among the many issues tackled by the two candidates was the economy as one of the more persistent issues, constantly ranked as the most important among voters. Here to break down what was said is Market Shares analyst Ethan Kraut. Ethan, tell us what you got.
Thanks, guys. As you mentioned, a lot was covered at the debate, including immigration, abortion access, and even the eating of pets. But one of the most important issues to voters covered Tuesday night was the economy. Vice President Harris laid out a number of her economic plans she intends to implement if she is elected. Take a listen.
I have a plan to give startup businesses $50,000 tax deduction, to pursue their ambitions, their innovation, their ideas, their hard work. I have a plan, $6,000 for young families for the first year of your child's life, to help you in that most critical stage of your child's development.
Now let's take a look at that $50,000 tax credit first for new small businesses. One of the centerpieces of her economic plan, This is a 10 times increase from the current $5,000 tax credit that small businesses receive. Along with the tax credit, Harris has proposed triggering 25 million new small business applications, as well as reducing red tape for small business owners. Now, as for the $6,000 child tax credit, this is a policy Democrats have been proposing for years. It's a major increase from the 2021 American Rescue Plan that included a $3,600 tax credit that has since expired. According to Columbia University's Center on Poverty and Social Policy, the 2021 tax credit reduced child poverty by nearly 30% and reached about 61 million children. This is why the Harris campaign has promoted this policy as one that can make a major immediate impact on families. Now, as for the former president, the only major economic policy he pushed Tuesday night was an increase on tariffs on imports. Here's what he had to say.
We're doing tariffs on other countries. Other countries are going to finally, after 75 years, pay us back for all that we've done for the world. And the tariff will be substantial in some cases.
Now, the proposal includes a 60% tariff on imports from China, as well as a 10% tariff on imports from all other countries. Now, Trump claims the tariffs won't have a negative effect on inflation. However, the vice president claims that companies will only pass the higher costs onto the consumers, even calling it the Trump sales tax.
Ethan, a lot there. I want to get to talking about energy here. There wasn't a lot of talk about climate change, which we know is an issue for young voters, but there was a lot of talk about energy. What specifically did Kamala Harris and Trump have to say about solar?
Yeah, so both talked about solar. The vice president saying she is for both solar, wind energy, as she has shown time and time again as the vice president. Trump was a little iffy on it. He said that solar takes a lot of desert space. He complained about that, but then he also left it off saying he's a big fan of solar, so he's a little on the fence about that. But something to note, after the debate, lots of solar stocks were up big. The day after, First Solar was up 15%, Sunrun and Solar Edge were both up 8%, and SunNova were up 6%. Now, this was showing after Harris clearly won the debate among most analysts. And if Harris is elected, it could be proven that she will be better with solar energy, providing more with it.
Well, we saw solar energy. They had a huge bump in the in stocks for the last few years, thanks in large part to the Inflation Reduction Act. So we'll see if that continues. But it seems like Wall Street indicating that they're looking like Vice President Harris could have a slight edge here in the polls.
Yeah, absolutely. Like you were saying, the fact that the solar energy ticked up on the stock market, definitely in favor of Vice President Harris and her performance during the debate. Peter?
All right, Ethan, thank you so much for keeping an eye on it. We'll rely on you as we tick down 52 days to go until Election Day. Well, despite a plunge last week, all the major indexes back in the green. We'll have your market update after the break. Stay with us here on Market Shares.
Come on, it's not that hard.
My big man fingers are having a problem with these little tiny buttons.
Whoa, watch it there. Your blood pressure's gonna go through the roof.
Tell me about it. I'm trying to learn how to get it down. Instead, it keeps going up.
High blood pressure can increase the risk for heart attack or stroke. Learn how to keep yours at a healthy range.
Ever hear a voice command? Just say text barbershop to 97779.
That's not what I said.
Just give me that. Now my blood pressure's up.
Thanks for sticking with us here on Market Shares. Peter Elliott alongside Michael Lamorte. All right, so we talked about the market here. It's been a pretty good week despite this Friday the 13th, the harrowing day. It's been pretty good, all in the green, not a lot in the red. All the major indexes up on the week, the NASDAQ, S&P, and Dow. And that all comes, Michael, as Fed Chair Jerome Powell set to cut rates for the first time in 2.5 years.
Yeah, S&P 500 and the NASDAQ look to extend that 4-day winning streak that they have going on. Solid gain for tech stocks all around. And the Fed Reserve, as we're talking about, expected to cut those interest rates by next week. So we're likely expecting to see that be even more beneficial for the three up there on the screen right now.
That's right. Michael, you talked about tech stocks. Let's start with one, perhaps the biggest one, Apple. What happened with that tech giant earlier this week?
Well, guys, Apple just released new products, a new iPhone, actually a whole lineup of iPhones as they do every single year, an Apple Watch, new headphones, and they're looking to make that push to include AI and say integrate that with the new iOS update. And it's reflecting in the stock, but just a little bit. Apple, of course, up one and a change of percent here on the last 5 days, up about $2.66. So we're expecting to see, as we head into the next quarters, those numbers go up as we start to see those new products come out and that AI get implemented.
Well, and of course, AI for Apple stands for Apple Intelligence. Of course, they've got to put their own spin on everything. We'll see if those software changes will lead to consumers actually having more demand for those iPhones. We know the hardware that Apple has, of course, that is always a great seller, but do you think consumers will actually will be induced to buy more iPhones? I know there's that Siri overhaul, you can create your new emojis, but do you think consumers are going to want to buy a new iPhone just because of that?
Well, I mean, I consider myself an Apple guru. I have the whole Apple ecosystem.
Sure.
And yeah, I mean, they're going to want to start to use these products. It's just going to make for a better user experience. But yeah, we'll see as the quarter goes on.
Well, speaking of software here, let's move on to another tech stock here, Adobe, down on the week, plummeting 9% today, trading around $531. It comes as the company is offering a weaker outlook on the next quarter. That's got investors a little disappointed, Michael. That, though, is despite the third quarter fared very well for Adobe. They made profit like they always do, but still Adobe not having a strong outlook for next quarter. Just your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Peter, they beat the Wall Street's expectations for those earnings reports like we were talking about, but there's uncertainty to that Adobe stock because they're not getting enough traction with that AI. Everything's revolving around AI in this quarter. We see with all these different stocks, but specifically Adobe, definitely not getting that traction they need with that AI software they implemented.
We see analysts kind of saying that they're competing now with these AI companies. Of course, you talk about Midjourney and Stability AI. We'll see the long-term evolution of those companies, but we know Adobe is traditionally strong. They continue to make profit year over year. So a down quarter expected for Adobe, but we'll see in the future how that plays out for them. All right, wrapping up here, our final mover of the week, also down, Michael. It's Moderna. You know them for their COVID shots, but a huge plummet this week, the lowest closing price since November 2023. Michael, why are analysts so down on Moderna?
Well, they announced plans to trim its research and development pipeline, and the whole point of that is to cut their costs. And they're also shifting their focus to get FDA approval for 10 of their products to treat cancer and respiratory illness. Now, that might be beneficial for the stock as we go into those later quarters, but right now, as they're cutting those costs, the stock's taking that hit.
Yeah, Wall Street kind of saying, we want you to move on a little bit from these COVID-19 vaccines. Still a big cash cow for the company, but you see the company move forward. But it's a little ironic here, the company wanting to move on, saying, hey, we've got 10 new product approvals in the works coming up, but still slashing that R&D development. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and as always, we'll be watching these stocks as we go into those quarters. But coming up on Market Shares, Coach and Michael Kors owners are in the courtroom for a federal antitrust trial. What this means for the company and its consumers, coming up after the break.
It's a beautiful day out here. Sunny today with light breezes, giving way to clouds in the afternoon. We could see some light precipitation to moderate precipitation later on, followed by powerful storm-like conditions. 90 miles per hour winds are expected. Authorities are asking everyone, stay indoors. Come on, that's it. Let's go.
When I was in foster care, I never knew when I would have to move. So I always had my suitcase ready to go. Then one day I was adopted. My new parents opened their hearts and home to me. My parents cook my favorite breakfast for me every morning. My parents take me on trips I never thought I would go on. They gave me a home and an even better reason to use that suitcase. My parents aren't perfect, but they're perfect for me.
Looking for these? You drive Buzzed, it could be one very expensive ride.
First, you gotta make bail. Then pay me to get your car back.
Your insurance premiums will go through the roof.
And my legal fees just keep adding up. All told, it could end up costing you $10,000.
Buzzed, busted, and broke. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.
All right, welcome back to Market Shares. Well, a partnership between the PGA Tour and Saudi-based Live Golf remains in limbo over a year after an international agreement between the two sides. But the two sides have been holding meetings all week in hopes of shrinking the divide in professional golf. Our analyst Alex Burstein is here to break it down. Alex, has any headway been made at all?
Yeah, Michael, the short answer is not definitely, but signs are pointing in the right direction for a possible agreement. Leaders from both the PGA Tour and the Saudi Public Investment Fund met in New York City this week to try to take a step forward in negotiations. It's now been over a year since news initially broke of a deal all the way back in June of 2023. Now, the leagues are not planning to fully combine competition. Instead, the initial plans were to create an LLC between the two sides, as well as the DP World Tour. This will combine commercial businesses and rights. The initial deal felt plenty of backlash. Putting it into effect has proven nearly impossible because of so. Back in June of this year, PGA Tour Commissioner Jay Monahan said that negotiations had reset between the two sides. The New York Times reported this week that the meeting that was happening in New York City was put together in just the past 2 weeks. An in-person meeting hoped to spark momentum for a deal. What actually happened has been quiet. Now, there were no players in attendance at this week's meetings, but players from both leagues have been making headlines. In a de facto PGA versus Live battle this December, PGA stars Rory McIlroy and Scottie Scheffler will battle Live's Bryson DeChambeau and Brooks Koepka. McIlroy spoke earlier this week about the importance of the event.
I think it's a way to show golf fans in the world that, you know, this is what could happen, or these are the possibilities going forward. You know, and I've been saying this for a long time. I think golf and golf fans deserve to see us together more than just 4 times a year.
Know that Rory McIlroy was once a vocal critic of this deal. He's been an ardent supporter of the PGA, so he's now playing against Live players. What has become of his stance?
Yeah, it's been quite the roller coaster for McIlroy over the last year. If you go back to last June when the news initially broke, at that time he was really the voice of the PGA and was very anti the deal. And then we kind of saw him take a step back. He was mainly focusing on his competition. He is one of the world's best golfers after all. And then there was an even bigger shift this past May when we learned that he's actually part of a negotiation committee between the two sides. So he's representing the PGA Tour as a player. They're trying to negotiate something to happen between the PGA and the Live. And you see with this event that's coming up, there's just been a lot of room made for both sides to be playing against each other, and they're just trying to smooth out the golf world so that the fans can get back to watching competitive golf.
Yes, as you were saying, Alex, a lot of room for them to be playing against each other. There seems to also be a lot of politics involved in the merger. What's the legal standing right now?
Yeah, I mean, as expected with the Saudi Public Investment Fund, there's a lot of questions about human rights violations, and that's been the main concern for people in kind of solidifying this deal. It seems like the financials are starting to come together. There's been nearly $3 billion put together for a commercial wing of this merger, half from the Saudi Public Investment Fund and half from U.S. investors like the Fenway Sports Group, who own the Boston Red Sox. But when you look at what this deal might become, there's also some anti anti-competition merger rules that could come into play. These are the two biggest golf leagues in the world right now, so the U.S. may have some problems with those two combining. So there's still a lot to be sorted out. The human rights violations by Saudi Arabia have complicated things, and only time will tell if this deal will actually go through.
All right, Alex, we really appreciate your coverage, and we'll hold you to that update. We appreciate it. Well, with the Biden administration really targeting those mergers, just like Alex was talking about, watch out for Lena Khan and the FTC. They're targeting specifically mergers in the grocery, technology, and apparel industries to combat inflation. Just like that, a new set of luxury brands are now under fire. Here to break down what that means for consumers is market shares analyst Ben Basuck. Ben?
Yeah, thanks, guys. So Coach's owner, Tapestry, and Michael Kors owner, Capri, are facing a federal antitrust lawsuit this week over the proposed merger. The combination comes after announcing their $8.5 million acquisition over a year ago. Now, the Federal Trade Commission sued in April to block the deal, noting higher prices for consumers. Joanne Kavrasarat, CEO of Tapestry, says the combination of Coach, Kate Spade, and Stuart Weitzman, together with Versace, Jimmy Choo, and Michael Kors, creates a new powerful global luxury house, unlocking a unique opportunity to drive enhanced value for our consumers, employees, communities, and shareholders around the world, end quote. Now, the FTC argues both brands' similar prices and direct department store sales approach would harm shoppers. Tapestry says the deal allows them to keep up with newer brands, trends, and changing consumer tastes.
All right, Ben. Well, we've seen a couple of mergers in the past, within the last year actually, be unsuccessful. But what can consumers expect to see should the merger get past the FTC?
Yeah, like most mergers like this, consumers will likely see a decrease in quality and an increase in price. Now, looking at some numbers here, we're going to see price increases of around 15 to 17% in those sectors for those combined company goods. Now, when it comes to the handbag industry as a whole, we're looking at margins of around 60 to 80%. Obviously, there's inflation and price increases. That's going to hit earnings, and they're going to see increased earnings in those sectors. Now, after the merger, we're going to see around 58% market share that the company would have, so definitely dominating competition.
Ben, I want to know here, what effect will this merger have on shareholders here of those 6 luxury brands?
Yeah, looking at shareholders, looking at stocks right now. So Tapestry shares as a whole have been up around 13% this year, and Capri stock tumbled around 21%. Today, they're both in the green, just up around 3%, but only time will tell what happens after that merger. We'll have to see if those markets hold steady.
All right, Ben, thank you so much. Well, still ahead here on market shares, we're getting soupy. A popular soup company is changing its name in an effort to rebrand. You can predict which one it is. Stay tuned. More on the way.
Well, Thomas, you've got pre-diabetes. But with more exercise and a change in diet, it can be reversed.
I've tried exercising. It just makes me hungry for bacon.
I love bacon, too. And who really likes to exercise?
Not me.
Me neither.
Nobody. So we're good?
What? Oh, you still have pre-diabetes. Big time.
Here's your check. Oh, you got it.
You know, since I got rid of my car, I really enjoy walking.
Okay. God, no.
Getting pulled over for buzz driving could cost you around $10,000 in fines, legal fees, and increased insurance rates.
Oh, you're home early.
You live with your mom?
That'll set your game back a few years. Buzzed, busted, and broke. Because buzz driving is drunk driving.
There's one thing you can never have sex without.
It's not something you buy.
Or something you take.
In fact, there's only one way to get it.
It has to be given to you, freely.
It's consent.
Because sex without it isn't sex.
It's rape. Consent.
If you don't get it, you don't get it. It's on us to stop sexual assault.
Learn how and take the pledge at itsonus.org.
Remember in The Social Network when Sean Parker tells Mark Zuckerberg to drop the in the Facebook because it's cleaner? Well, Campbell Soup is doing the same, dropping the soup from Campbell Soup. The 155-year-old comfort food company is planning to drop it from its name, rebranding as just Campbell's Company. This comes as more consumers have been reaching for snacks rather than serve soup.
Now, in addition to its lineup of soups, Campbell now owns brands like Goldfish, Schneider's, and Cape Cod. Many food companies like Campbell are pivoting to gain a larger share of the snack market, valued at more than $200 billion. Last year, Campbell's snack sales grew 13%, while its soups grew 3%. Well, that's all the time we have here for you guys on this episode of Market Shares. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at CitrusTV News and like us on Facebook. I'm Michael Lamorte.
I'm Peter Elliott, and I'm craving some soup. Have a great night.